You don't become dangerous overnight. No one wakes up one morning and suddenly terrifies an entire country. Danger is built, slowly, quietly, brick by brick. And in the case of Malcolm X, it wasn't violence that made him a threat. It was clarity. By the time America realized what Malcolm had become, it was already too late to ignore him and too risky to let him keep going. This is not the story of how Malcolm X was born or how prison changed him. You already know that part, Decoy. This is the story of what happened after the transformation, when his voice grew too sharp, his words too precise, and his influence too wide to contain. When Malcolm X walked out of Charlestown State Prison in 1952, he stepped into an America that didn't want him free. This was a country where black children couldn't sit at lunch counters, where entire towns had signs that read, "Sundown Towns," "Negroes," "Don't let the sun set on you here," where Emmett Till would be lynched just 3 years later for allegedly whistling at a white woman. Malcolm didn't step into freedom. He stepped into a war zone, and the Nation of Islam gave him the weapons, structure, discipline, and a language that turned his anger into a scalpel. When Malcolm X stepped onto a stage, he didn't speak. He electrified rooms. His speeches weren't poetic. They were surgical. He didn't ask white America for permission, forgiveness, or gradual progress. He told black Americans the truth as he saw it, that dignity was not something you waited for. It was something you claimed. And for the first time, thousands of young black men heard a leader speak without fear, without apology, and without softening his message for comfort. That message spread fast, too fast. Mosques that had 200 members suddenly had 2,000, streets crowded, recordings circulated on vinyl, passed hand to hand. Malcolm became the most visible, most quoted, most controversial black voice in the country. While other leaders spoke the language of hope and patience, Malcolm spoke the language of reality and self-respect. And that made him unpredictable. Governments can negotiate with patience. They can delay hope. But clarity is dangerous, because once people see the truth clearly, you cannot unshow it. But here's what most people don't know. While Malcolm was building a movement in public, the FBI was building a file on him in private, and what they found would eventually justify something far more sinister than surveillance. Behind the scenes, the surveillance had already begun. Not casual monitoring, a full operation. In 1956, J. Edgar Hoover authorized COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program designed to disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize black leaders. Malcolm X wasn't just on the list. He was the list. By the early 1960s, the FBI had assigned multiple agents to follow him full-time. Every speech transcribed, every movement logged, every phone call recorded. His file would eventually grow to over 3,000 pages. They didn't fear Malcolm because he called for violence. He didn't. They feared him because he reframed the conversation. Malcolm stopped talking about civil rights and started talking about human rights. That shift mattered more than most people realize. Civil rights are domestic, human rights are global, and once you internationalize a problem, you invite the United Nations, the world press, and foreign governments to judge it. Malcolm was turning America's race problem into a human rights violation on the world stage, and for a country fighting the Cold War, trying to position itself as the leader of the free world, that was unacceptable. So the question became, how do you silence a man who isn't breaking the law? You don't arrest him. You isolate him. You turn his allies into enemies. You let his own movement destroy him. And that's exactly what started to happen. The real fracture in Malcolm's life didn't start with the government. It started at home, inside the Nation of Islam. Malcolm began to see things he couldn't unsee. Moral contradictions, power games, silence where there should have been accountability. Elijah Muhammad, the man Malcolm called his spiritual father, was accused of fathering children with multiple young secretaries in the organization. When Malcolm confronted the leadership, hoping for transparency, he was met with hostility. He was told to stay quiet, to protect the image, to be loyal. But Malcolm was not built to stay quiet. The same honesty that made him powerful in public made him dangerous inside his own organization. When he questioned leadership, when he refused to protect hypocrisy, he crossed an invisible line. Then came November 22nd, 1963. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The Nation of Islam issued a statement, no comment. But Malcolm, speaking at a public event, made an offhand remark. He called it chickens coming home to roost, meaning that America's violence abroad had returned home. It was reckless, inflammatory, and it gave the Nation of Islam the excuse they needed. Malcolm was silenced, suspended indefinitely. His platform shrank, his protection faded, allies became distant, and Malcolm felt it. Not just politically, psychologically. For the first time since prison, he was truly alone, and that loneliness forced reflection. But instead of retreating into bitterness, Malcolm made a decision that would change everything. He left America, and he went to see the world with his own eyes. In April 1964, Malcolm X boarded a plane to the Middle East. He was 38 years old, and for the first time in his life, he was walking away from the only structure he had ever known. His first stop, Mecca, the Islamic pilgrimage every Muslim is encouraged to make once in their lifetime. Malcolm arrived expecting ritual. What he found was revelation. In Mecca, Malcolm saw something that shattered his worldview. Muslims of every race, white, black, Arab, Asian, praying side by side, eating together, sleeping in the same tents. No racial hierarchy, no separation. Just unity under one God. Malcolm wrote letters home to his wife Betty and his assistants, and in one of them, he said, "I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, and slept in the same bed, with fellow Muslims whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white." This was not the Malcolm America knew. The man who had said, "The white man is the devil," was now sharing meals with white Muslims and calling them brothers. From Mecca, Malcolm traveled to Africa. He met Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, the first president of an independent African nation. He met leaders in Nigeria, Tanzania, and Egypt, men who had thrown off colonial rule and built their own nations. They treated Malcolm not as a controversial American activist, but as a statesman, a leader in exile. And Malcolm absorbed it all. He saw unity without submission, discipline without racial hatred, power without apology. When Malcolm X returned to America in May 1964, he was no longer just a voice of anger. He was a global thinker, a strategist, and that made him more dangerous than ever before. His message evolved. He spoke less in absolutes and more in strategy. He still rejected oppression, but now he understood power on a global scale. He began building new organizations, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, new alliances, new frameworks. He was no longer confined to one ideology or one movement And that terrified everyone watching, because a man who can change is harder to predict than a man who never does. By the end of 1964, Malcolm knew he was marked. The threats were no longer vague. They were specific. On February 14th, 1965, exactly 1 week before his death, Malcolm's home in Queens was firebombed in the middle of the night. His wife and 4 daughters barely escaped. Malcolm knew who was behind it, and he knew what was coming. Friends warned him to slow down, to step back, to leave the country again. But Malcolm understood something most people don't. Once you see clearly, slowing down feels like lying. And Malcolm refused to lie, even if the truth cost him his life. On February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X arrived at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem to give a speech. The room was packed, around 400 people, but security was strangely light that day. Malcolm's usual bodyguards had been told to stay back. The atmosphere was tense. People could feel it. Malcolm stepped onto the stage at 3 p.m. He greeted the crowd. "Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you." The crowd responded. "Wa alaikumus salam." "And upon you peace." Then, chaos. A disturbance in the crowd. Someone shouted, people turned, and in that split second of distraction, 3 men rushed the stage, shots rang out, a sawed-off shotgun, 2 pistols. Malcolm was hit 21 times. He collapsed. The crowd screamed. Someone tried to give him CPR, but it was too late. Malcolm X was dead before the ambulance arrived. He was 39 years old. 3 men were arrested: Talmadge Hayer, Norman 3X Butler, and Thomas 15X Johnson, all tied to the Nation of Islam. They were convicted. Case closed. But the story didn't end there. For decades, questions lingered. Witnesses said there were more shooters. Butler and Johnson maintained their innocence. And in 2020, the Manhattan District Attorney reopened the case. What they found was damning. The FBI and NYPD had withheld evidence. Key witnesses were ignored. Alibis were buried. In 2021, 56 years after Malcolm's death, Butler and Johnson were exonerated. Innocent men had spent over 20 years in prison. So who really killed Malcolm X? The shooters were real. But who gave the orders? Was it only the Nation of Islam? Or were there other forces at play? The FBI? The NYPD? We still don't have all the answers. But here's what we do know. Malcolm X was only 39 years old when he died, and yet his legacy outlived presidents, movements, and myths. Not because he was perfect. He wasn't. Not because he was always right. He wasn't. But because he was honest enough to evolve, brave enough to confront power, and disciplined enough to accept the consequences. Malcolm X didn't ask America to love him. He asked it to look at itself. And history shows us something uncomfortable. Societies rarely kill voices that are harmless. They silence the ones that force reflection. And that is why Malcolm X still matters. Malcolm X was 39 when they killed him. But here's what they couldn't kill. The questions he planted, the frameworks he built, the mirror he held up to power. In the next video, we're going where most people stop. What did Malcolm predict that came true? What warnings did America ignore? And why are his most dangerous ideas the ones we still refuse to teach in schools? This isn't history. This is architecture. The blueprint Malcolm left behind is still being built on today, by movements you see in the streets, by leaders you hear on stages, by ideas that make people uncomfortable. Hit subscribe, because the most important part of Malcolm's story isn't how he died. It's what happened after his death, and almost nobody talks about it. See you in the next one.